Welcome to WineLineRadio again. This is Robert Scott, your host, and I am very excited today to have with us Olivier Masmondet. Olivier is the export manager, sommelier, and all-around raconteur for Louis Jadot, famous Burgundy house. So, Olivier, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. How are you doing?
I am doing fine, thank you. Before we talk about you, let's talk a little bit about Louis Jadot and give us some history and your experiences with it. Thank you.
Louis Jadot, I have to talk about the history of Louis Jadot because it's a long history, but everything started in 1826 when Louis Jadot himself bought his first premier cru vineyard in Burgundy, the Clos des Ursules. And he founded Louis Jadot in 1859 when he married a young woman. It's called a happy marriage when you marry someone that owns some vineyard. So they bought some vineyard together and started to produce Burgundy wine, and immediately they got success. They were super well known in France and especially in the northern part of Europe because they started to export very quickly. Jadot has an history of exporting its wine over the world, and if we look now, we are exported in 122 countries, so it's very important for us. But going back to the Jadot family, they've been making wine since 1859, and everything went extremely well until 1985, when Madame Jadot decided to open the capital of Louis Jadot to other investors, because the Jadot family was becoming a little bit too big and a bit too slow to take decisions. So she invited our American importer, Rudy Kopf, the owner of our importer, Cobran Corporation, Rudy Kopf, who, by the way, used to be originally the wine buyer at Macy's in New York City before the Second World War.
Oh, is that right?
And he was already importing and selling Jadot wines at Macy's. And Jadot wines were sold in the U.S. only at Macy's, under the Macy's label. So after the Second World War, Rudy opened his own import company that he called Cobrand, and he started to import Jadot wines like that before everybody, because of very few Burgundies were making it to the U.S. at that time. And Jadot started to export wines like Beaujolais Village, Macon Village, Pouilly-Fuissé, and then later on what we call the Great Burgundies, the villages, the Premier Crus and the Grand Crus. And in 1985, Madame Jadot invited Rudy Kopf to invest at Louis Jadot, which he did with pleasure. And Jadot is now owned by, of course, the Jadot family and also the Rudy Kopf family. And it's been a great partnership since. And Jadot now owns over 600 acres of vineyard in Burgundy. And as a matter of fact, 60% of what we produce in Burgundy comes from a state vineyard, and 40% of our production comes from grapes that we buy. Because Jadot, if we do some négociant business, it comes only from grapes, because we like to control the entire process. So it's not buying finished wine or must or whatever. It's more about the relationship with the growers, which is the key in Burgundy. Everything is about relationship.
Absolutely. And 600 acres in Burgundy is a really large holding.
It is. It took Jadot 150 years to get there, but Jadot has always had in mind to reflect and to mirror the appellation system of Burgundy, starting from the north with Chablis and going down to Côte d'Or, to Côte-Chalonnaise, Mâconnais, and Beaujolais sub-regions. And that's exactly what we did. So we have a big holding of vineyard in the Côte d'Or with a winery in Beaune, but we have also a vineyard in the Cru Beaujolais appellation with Château des Jacques. It's another 200 acres. We have also vineyards in Pouilly-Fuissé, and also we own a separate estate in Pouilly-Fuissé called Domaine Ferret, where we have 40 acres. And of course, we have some vineyard in Beaujolais Village and Macon Village appellation. And recently, in 2013, we invested in Oregon, and in Yamhill, Carleton County, and we bought a vineyard called Resonance, which was planted in 1981, one of the first Pinot Noir vineyard planted in Oregon. And the estate is 20 acres, and we started to make wine up there. It's actually a winemaker, Jacques Lardière, that has been making wine for the past 42 vintages at Jadot, that is now making wine in Oregon. So it's been an interesting project for us. We've been looking to invest in Oregon for a long time, and it was just a matter of finding the right vineyard because we didn't want to do only a partnership, but we wanted to build our own winery and have our own vineyard there. So it's been quite exciting for Louis Jadot, and Louis Jadot it's a combination of tradition, because the label, as you can see, the label is very traditional, and the high quality profile that we impose to ourselves is very important. But at the same time, we look at the future. We look at the future, and we want to be the ones that are doing the right thing at the right time, but always in mind with the respect of people.
Well, that is a great philosophy to have. And, it's always been very interesting to me, talking about the terroir of Burgundy, how it can be totally different from one side of the road to the other.
Sure.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
Or give an example?
Yeah, I mean, Burgundy for a lot of people, it sounds complicated, but when you think about it, it's only 100% Pinot Noir, 100% Chardonnay. Then after, to your point, it's a question of the typicity of the soil, the composition of the soil. In Burgundy, and especially in Côte d'Or, we have bedrock that is limestone based. It's just like that. What makes the difference in Burgundy is what type of soil will come on top of that limestone and how deep it will go. So basically, Burgundy is 45 miles long and no wider than a mile. So it's a strip of land. And within that strip of land, you have what we call vineyards that are planted at the bottom of the hill, because it's one hill. And it's one side of the hill. If you go to Napa, it's the two sides of the hill that are planted. In Burgundy, it's only one side. And all the vineyards almost all the vineyards have an eastern exposure. And so vineyards that are planted at the bottom of the hill, on the flat level, will have a little bit more topsoil. The bedrock will run a little deeper. And as soon as you move up the hill, you have less topsoil and more limestone. So the vine will be more in contact with the limestone. So that is very important to know, that the wines at the bottom will be more village appellation oriented, and they will produce wines that are more accessible. As soon as you move up the hill, more limestone influence, and that will make wine a little bit more minerally oriented, with more tension, a little bit more long aging. So within that top layer of soil that comes on top of the bedrock, you're going to see nuances in the composition of the topsoil. And basically in Burgundy, you can say, all right, it's marls, clay, some iron oxide, etc., etc. It's pretty much the same all over Burgundy. But then it's within the composition of the topsoil in some single vineyard, you're going to see nuances in the composition. A little bit more percentage of iron here, a little bit more clay here, just 1 or 2%. And that's enough to change everything, because you are using one single grape. So the Pinot Noir or the Chardonnay will act like transmitter. They will pick up the nuances from that single vineyard, and it will end up in the wine. And that's what we do at Jadot and in Burgundy in general. It's trying to understand the typicity of the soil, the nuances in the composition of the topsoil, and translate it and make sure that it goes into the final wine. And it's much easier with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, because if we were blending grapes like in Bordeaux or in Champagne or in Napa, we'll be raising the typicity, that original aspect of the single vineyard. So that is very important for us. That's the reality of Burgundy. So Burgundy is the land of nuances. It's nothing else. It's one terroir, one single terroir, and you're going to see nuances in the composition of the soil of the single vineyard or village's vineyard. It's simple as that.
So when Louis Jadot made a decision to go to Oregon, did they look for a soil profile that was similar to Burgundy?
Very, very sincerely, very honestly, it was not the idea to trying to make Burgundy out of Oregon. That was not the idea. What we were looking for, it's that history part that in Oregon is very important. What made the first people to look at Oregon in the late 70s, early 80s? What made them plant vineyard at that time? When we found resonance, Yamhill Carlton, we look at the soil. Yeah, the soil is quite similar, if I may say, maybe not similar, but there is some common point between the soil of Yamhill Carlton and maybe Côte de Nuit in Burgundy. But it's not exactly the same because in Oregon you are in a volcanic soil, and in Burgundy you're in limestone-based soil. So there are different aspects that we had to integrate in our thinking, in our search for the holy grail, for the perfect vineyard. But honestly, it was more the fact that Jacques Larder, our winemaker, was there one summer, and he really visited that vineyard. It's not big, 20 acres. He saw the vineyard, tasted the wine, and it was simple as that. He fell in love. And it's the potential of the vineyard that we see. And yes, we bring maybe our Burgundy knowledge to Oregon, but the idea is to make Oregon wines even greater, not look like Burgundy. So it's very important for us to know where we are and to respect that aspect.
You know, when many years ago, my first introduction to Burgundy was there was a very fine wine store here in Winter Park, and knew the owner quite well. And he said to me one day, he says, I have some Burgundy I need to get rid of. He says, believe me, it's not much now, but it will develop nicely for you. And it was from Le Doigt.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that was my first introduction to Burgundy. And Le Doigt is not a famous area like Côte d'Or or other places, but or Mâcon. But it started me thinking about, I need to know more about Burgundy. So do you do any production from the area around Le Doigt?
Yes, we do. We own some vineyard, and La Doigt is quite interesting because it's one of the 3 villages around the hill of Corton, where you have a lot of Grand Cru vineyard planted there. And La Doigt, yes, you're right, it doesn't have the same reputation as other villages because it's what we call a petit village, a small village, that actually we drink the La Doigt wines in Burgundy locally a lot because they are it's good value wines, and you make white wine and red wine there that are absolutely delicious. They can age easily at 10 years, but they are a good representation of what we can do within Pinot Noir and Chardonnay world from Burgundy, but with a kind of traditional aspect in the style of wine of La Doigt. La Doigt will never be the most sexy Pinot Noir you're going to see. On the contrary, it will be more on the traditional aspect, more tannins that are a little bit more angular, but that age well. So it's kind of, I love La Doigt because it's an underdog appellation, and it's off the beaten path a little bit, yeah.
And I love wines from lesser-known appellations, and I think they represent generally great value, like you say. And I think that we just, maybe a year ago, drank the last bottle of the Le Doigt we had.
Oh, wow.
And it aged very well, threw off very little sediment, and was quite tasty. So, merci Le Doigt.
Merci La Doigt, yeah, you're right.
So, tell us a little bit, Olivier, how did you get involved with Louis Jadot?
Long story short, before working for Louis Jadot, I used to be a sommelier working in 3-star Michelin restaurant in France, and I enjoyed that time very much. So I spent 14 years being a sommelier in France, and I was lucky enough to be based and work for a 3-star Michelin restaurant not too far from Burgundy, only 1 hour away from Burgundy. So I used to buy, as a sommelier, the best wines of Burgundy, but from barrel, from cask, because at that time we were buying from the barrels. So the aspect of knowing Burgundy for me was very important. That's why I refused to travel to work in a foreign country as a sommelier, because I wanted to be as close as possible as Burgundy, because Burgundy, as you know, one life is not enough to understand everything about Burgundy. That's what makes it exciting. So, but I had a very good friend of mine who was actually working at Jadot, and for many years he was coming at that 3-star Michelin restaurant with his father and his family, and asking me all the time, "You should work at Jadot because you have the talent to work on the export team, and we'd love to have a person like you with the experience you have and the knowledge you have." And I always refused for many years. 5 or 6 years I spent saying no. And then one day I said, enough is enough, just, set up an appointment with the president of Jadot that I knew before. And when I visited the president of Jadot, they had a project for me, and the project was really interesting. And that is what makes the difference. The entire project behind me joining Jadot was not only a sales project, it was also explaining to the world what we were doing. And that was very important for me. Not being a salesperson only or export director or whatever, I don't care. I wanted more because that's the way I feel. And Burgundy needs to be explained. It's a pleasure to explain to people what is Burgundy, how it works and all that. And meeting people all over the world is fantastic. So the project was interesting because it was first to manage the US. And the US historically is the #1 country for Jadot. And not since, before 2000, it was managed by the Jadot people, the Jadot family. No one was from the outside was going to manage the US. So the project was super interesting. And managing other countries for Jadot also as well. So now it's been 18 years, and I feel that it was this morning that I started with Jadot. So
that's wonderful to have that kind of feeling about your life's work. That's very
it's
pleasant.
a passion.
Yes,
It's a passion.
it is a passion. And one of the things that as we travel the world and talk to winemakers, small and large, and prestigious and village wines, we find that nearly everybody in the wine business has a great passion for what they're doing.
True.
So we appreciate that aspect of it, and we look forward to meeting those people and talking with people like you. It's been illuminating. Thank you very much. And can you point us or tell us about what Louis Jadot is going to strive for in the future?
That's a good question, because Oregon is already a big project for us for the future, because Burgundy is what it is. You have vineyards that have been planted for 2,000 years, so it's not going to expand. We don't have the right to expand the plantation of Burgundy vineyard, and it's fine that way. We have to deal with what we have. So we have reached a certain plateau with Louis Jadot, especially because we spent a lot of years trying to make wines consistent in quality and better than anyone in the competition at that scale, because producing 10 barrels of wine, it's super easy. I don't want to be disrespectful. I don't want to lack any respect to the small producer, but it's 10 barrels, it's pretty easy. But when you start to produce 100 barrels, 200 barrels of a wine, it's a little bit more challenging. And it's very important to realize that Burgundy, if we look at the world of wine production, Burgundy represents only 0.5% of the world of wine production.
Wow.
0.5. And Burgundy is 5 times smaller than Bordeaux. So whatever we do in Burgundy will be always on the small scale. When I talk to people about wines, and sometimes I tell them, well, we make 500 cases of that wine. 500 cases of a wine at Jadot, it's big. It's big for us. When I say, we produce a white Bourgogne and we make 2,000 cases, 2,000 cases of wine for us, it's huge. It's huge. And I understand on the other hand that you have people that are making, like Mouton Rothschild in Bordeaux, they are making 60,000 cases of one single wine, while Jadot, we produce about 70,000 cases of wine. Overall, that's the whole production, but it's 125 different wines. So average production at Jadot is around 600 cases per wine. So that's an average production. Of course, we produce more white Bourgogne or villages than Premier Cru and Grand Cru side by side, but it's really interesting to understand that Jadot is a lot of small vineyard and small production altogether. So the future for us, it will remain the same in Burgundy, because we have worked extremely well in making great wines, even from the lowest appellation, which is one of the strengths of Louis Jadot as well. Because a simple Beaujolais village at Jadot should be as good as our Grand Cru wines, meaning that we use the same philosophy and the same approach. So it's a work in process. Continuously we try to, every year it's a different challenge. It's a new vintage. We have to work hard to make these wines extremely good. And it's not only a winemaking aspect, it's essentially understanding what's going on in the vineyards, how to work with the vineyard people, the vineyard management, because you cannot make good wines without producing any good grapes. So that's very, very important for us to not only focus on the winemaking. At Jadot, we love to say we don't make wine, we produce wine. So that's very important for us. So
And
to answer, I didn't answer your question. The future is Burgundy and Burgundy. That will be great for that.
But you didn't answer my question.
So my question is Burgundy and nothing but Burgundy for the future, that's for sure. And the Oregon development is very important. Then after we'll see. But we will continue in producing quality wines that are get wonderful ratings and from all over the world. And very importantly also, we will continue to work very hard in the quality of the distribution all over the world, because that's key. If you produce good wines and you don't have a good quality of distribution, that's like shooting yourself in the foot. So that's very important for us. But the future is interesting, because we are worried a little bit in Burgundy about the global warming aspect, the fact that we are harvesting much earlier than before, and that we've been exposed to a lot of climate accidents for the past 7 years that have been quite difficult for Burgundy, and making production in Burgundy tiny and even smaller than usual. So we're a little bit worried about that. Burgundy just got rid of what we call herbicide, which are the weed killers altogether. The next step will be to get rid of pesticide in Burgundy in the future. We don't know when it's going to happen, but what is interesting in Burgundy, a decision like that, it's a common decision. It's not one winery at a time, it's everyone. And that tells you a lot about the Burgundian spirit. So we are a little bit worried about the global warming. If you look at the date of harvest, when you harvest in August in Burgundy, it means it was a very warm year. Last century, we had only 1 year, one vintage was harvested in August. That was 1976. This century, 21st century, out of 18 vintages harvested so far, 10 out of 18 vintages were harvested by the late August or early September. So whatever we say, it's happening, it's there, and it worries us a lot.
Oh, I'm sure. As a marketing person, I'm always interested in the approach a winery has or a brand has toward disseminating information about their products. And I think a certain amount of that happens on the label, on the shelf. And Louis Jadot's label, as you said, is very traditional. But because of that, I think it stands out on the shelf.
True.
You know, so what do you do in terms of marketing your product?
The label is the first tool in terms of marketing for a winery, I believe. The choice that was made by Jadot to use one single label for all its wine was a choice made years and years ago, decades ago, and there was a meaning behind it. It's the philosophy was we sign our wines with one single label. We don't produce reserve wine. We don't produce special cuvée. All the wines are treated the same way. That's very important for Jadot. But in terms of marketing, we, as Burgundian, we don't do a lot of marketing. We're not very good at it, and very honestly, we are not ready to put a little penguin on the label or a big rabbit or whatever. It goes more by the name of the appellation, the location of the vineyard. That's true. So that's what makes Burgundy different than the other region. But we try to do some marketing stuff, but we are not very, very successful. That's why we leave it to our American importer. That's how confident we are with our American importer.
Well, as well you should, I think. You know, Olivier Masmondet.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It has been wonderful talking to you. Mary and I hope to see you in Burgundy someday.
You're the most welcome. The doors are open.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to you. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was mine.